I wanted to talk next about the New York 3rd District election. Now, we already released a video on the second channel about it. We've already talked about it on stream. But I wanted to talk about, number one, the final results, which was 91,338 for Thomas Susie, who is a previous Democrat who is from the area, who has a reputation in the area, against Mazi Philip, who was the GOP challenger, who had some controversy because he was still technically registered as a Democrat, but they were running in George Santos's old seat, the seat that George Santos won it pretty handily. And so this just went from a +8 like Republican district in 2022 to now a +8 Democrat district in 2024. So this is a significant shift. And in the special elections, not only does this indicate, you know, we got one more seat closer to having a majority. We've just shrunken the Republican House the majority to only 2 seats. And we're, I think if we want to get up to 218, we're only 5 away. So it's significant when it comes to that, but it's also significant because people want to use it to try to indicate what it looks like going into 2024. And while I do think to some degree we can look at these elections because polling isn't everything, you need to figure out who's actually motivated to turn out, because somebody could support a Republican candidate but not want to bother coming out. For example, there was a snowstorm in New York's 3rd district, and the snow didn't let up until about noon. And so some people are theorizing whether that played into Susie winning, especially since Democrats, through the Republican fear-mongering about mail-in ballots, are more likely to do absentee and mail-in ballots, getting their votes locked in earlier. But also, there was a really good turnout in Queens, which, of course, the Democrats did very well in. And Thomas Susie has a really good reputation in. So turnout was good. Democrats turned out well. I think that a lot of the issues that were motivating people here, like abortion, democracy, a bunch of local issues as well. Mazi tried to make immigration a big issue here, which I think ended up biting her in the ass once Republicans ended up shooting the compromise bill that was going through the Senate and House, especially since Mazi Philip was trying to use the compromise bill that was going through the Senate and the House that was negotiated by Senator Lankford on the Republican side and the senator from Connecticut on the Democrat side. She was championing it as, hey, look, the Republicans can compromise. We care about resolving the border. And so when the Republicans sunk it, it kind of left her out in the water to drown electorally. And drown she did. And so Thomas Susie ended up winning pretty handily. Now, I would temper fevers about using this to indicate that we've got a really, like, oh my God, Democrats are looking great headed into 2024. I do think it indicates that to some degree. It shows that Democrats seem to be somewhat motivated. This isn't the first special election to go really well for Democrats. Special elections have been going pretty well for Democrats so far leading up to this one. So this is a continuation of that trend. This is also a special seat since this was George Santos's seat, and George Santos was a scandal-ridden freak. And so I think the Democrats performing well here also has to do with the specific circumstances of a special election. It's why it was a special election and not just a normal midterm election or general election. And Susie, and this is the most important part, has to some degree distanced himself from Joe Biden, from Washington, D.C., from the administration there, particularly on the issue of immigration. And so having this one by one, like this extends to Joe Biden, I think that is being overeager. I think somebody could end up voting for a congressional candidate and then having reason not to vote for a presidential candidate. But even with all those disclaimers, still good for Democrats and still not boding well for Republicans who are worried going into 2024, especially since they have to run with Donald Trump again. And as I said yesterday, not yesterday, on Tuesday when we first got the results, I said, look for the infighting. Look for the infighting. Look for the infighting. I'm telling you, man, these guys are going to tear each other up over this. I knew at number one, they were going to ask, hey, you know what? Why did we lose here? Was it because we sunk the bill? And that was going to be a big issue to fought over. There was going to be another issue of, hey, should we have really gotten rid of George Santos? I mean, I know he did all those violations and he was stealing from his fellow colleagues, but did we really need to? And Those are my two predictions, and those did happen. But another big reason that Johnson said that Republicans lost is the amount of money the Democrats spent. Here is from Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News. Johnson on the New York 3 district race said to House Republicans in a closed meeting, the Democrats spent $15 million to win a seat with a known candidate against an unknown Republican in the Biden district. So no one should panic. So this is silly. Because, again, George Santos won the district handily, and now Republicans have lost this district handily. And this is only like a 1-year difference in between elections. So saying that, oh, they spent all this money, but it was on a Biden district, that is true that Democrats performed well and won the district in 2020, but Democrats performed not so well and lost the district in 2022. And now Democrats have won it back. So trying to go back to 2020 to indicate that this district didn't matter doesn't make much sense, especially since Republicans were spending much more on average on the New York 3rd district trying to win the race, as they understand that now they only have a 2-seat majority and he can try to sell it any way he wants. Only having a 2-seat majority is not helpful to a guy who's just barely holding on to the speakership by the skin of his teeth. Moving on, there was some commentators on Fox News who were asked, okay, so, you know, what happened? Why did this fail? Why did the pushing of the immigration issue not work?
You know, the New York special election that took place yesterday, the Democrat won, even though the Republican was pushing the immigration issue front and center. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think when we unpack that, that's going to have a lot more to do with mail-in ballots and with early voting.
So it's the mail. So there's nothing we could do. The Democrats were just mailing in all their ballots. And we're just doomed to lose because Democrats decided to vote by mail and not in person. What a silly argument. Republicans can vote by mail too. They're perfectly allowed to vote by mail. And hey, whether I vote by mail or vote in person, my vote only counts once anyway. You still got to convince said voter to vote for you. Maybe you could have convinced some of those mail-in voters to vote for you. Maybe you could have convinced some of the other people to vote for you. You still need to lose the election. It's not just about the means by which people vote. You can make available every means and encourage every means by voting on the planet and still not convince people to vote for you if your candidate isn't popular, your issues don't matter, or you're shown to not be able to govern, which I think was a big issue in this election, was Republicans getting basically diddly squat done all of this Congress, with them going from Kevin McCarthy to Steve Scalise to Tom Emmer to Jim Jordan, finally decided on Mike Johnson, and then Mike Johnson fails to get anything of significance done, barely able to keep the government open, every time just by the skin of his teeth, scaring investors, unable to get aid to the allies, not only that the majority of Americans care about, but also the majority of his colleagues care about, because it isn't just Israel, it's also issues like not just Ukraine, but also issues like Israel. That's not even talking about the failed Mayorkas impeachment or how much he's angered many members of his own party. Point is, I think that this has a lot to do with the chaos in Washington and then the sinking of the immigration deal that this candidate that was already in this district was partially running on and then got sunk, and then she had to completely shift her narrative. She was trying to show herself as a moderate compromiser in a district that Biden did win, and she was doing that by trying to pin her fortunes to that deal, and that was not a smart move for her. But it was also, not a smart move for the Republican Party to sink that from, I think, I understand that they want to run on the issue of immigration, but it might end up backfiring. It might end up not being interpreted by Americans like, oh, Biden failed on the issue of immigration here. I think a lot of it might be interpreted as, oh, wow, Republicans just want this as a wedge issue. Do they really want to solve this? And, they can hope on the former, but they can't stop the latter from happening if that's how the public interprets it.
And a storm happening the day of voting, where most of our voters vote. So I think that's going to be more of a turnout story than it is an issue story. But the Democrat was talking about the border too. Everybody's talking about the border. And at the end of the day,
again, it's just mail-in ballot and snowstorms. The message here is we don't need to learn anything. That we didn't really do anything wrong. There's not a question of funding. There's not a question of messaging. There's not a question of, hey, maybe we should have actually gone for that legislative compromise. Maybe that would have helped us. We could have said that, hey, we stood out for the American people. But no reflection whatsoever.
We have to hold someone accountable. I asked my colleagues, if you had an attorney general that just disagreed with the law, refused to enforce it, like a lot of these Soros local prosecutors, would we just say, oh,
Soros? Okay, so that's another one. That's another reason they lost.
Well, no, we would take action, and that's what the American people are demanding we do.
Soros is the reason. Well, of course, this was not the only interpretation of events. Here's a bunch of the fallout that was interviewed by Manu Raju. I forget how to pronounce his name, a CNN interviewer who was talking to tons of people like Representative Max Miller, Representative Manu, and Representative Norman about what they thought of the New York 3rd House race. Some of them angry that Santos was expelled. They wanted to keep the thief that was stealing from their colleagues to pay for his gay foot porn fetish. He wanted to keep him in Congress to honor the Republican Party and to embarrass the Republican Party on a bi-weekly basis.
Absolutely, she should have embraced Trump. The guy is our nominee, maybe not officially, but officially to me and the majority of Americans within this country. I think she could have done a better job on that front.
So he's saying that the reason, Max Miller is saying that the reason that she lost is that she didn't embrace Trump enough in New York.
We ought to be negotiating between the two houses. The president ought to exert some leadership between the two bodies, and we ought to get to a solution. Too many people around here want to put off victory and instead achieve defeat, and that's not something the American people expect.
I think we should have let the people of New York speak on Santos. So I thought
he wants to keep Santos in.
That was wrong, but it played out. People spoke, and he was elected.
Now that wasn't it. There was more after. Here is Donald's specifically going after the idea of getting Santos out of Congress, expelling Santos for his multiple crimes. Again, multiple crimes. And he's saying, oh, it was stupid to do that. We needed that vote. So, yeah, did he commit a crime? It is what it is. Whatever. We got to keep him in there. Mr. Delay, thanks for the tier 1. Appreciate it.
If he was found guilty, then yeah, he should remove himself from Congress. And if he wouldn't remove himself, then the chamber would have a responsibility to do that. But to preempt that, to score political points, was stupid.
A lot of Republicans here are already blaming you guys for pushing out George Santos. What do you say to them?
There are a lot of decisions that have occurred these last couple of months that have shrunk the majority. Perhaps George Santos, being honest, would have kept one more seat here in Congress.
Republicans have got to take advantage of early voting. We can't start so far behind.
I mean, Trump is the one who has criticized early voting. I mean, are you guys still feeling the ramifications of all that?
Well, I think the president understands what we're saying. There's a difference between mail ballots and in person. And, these are certainly conversations we'll have with the president.
Again, it's not, hey, here's what we should have done to win that election. Hey, maybe we could have compromised. If we just wouldn't have had an election in the first place, and we would have kept the criminal thief liar who lied about his mom dying on 9/11, who lied about being Jewish, lied about the school he went to, lied about the work he did, and used campaign funds to pay for OnlyFans. Maybe if we just kept him in Congress until he was expelled by the voters, then we would have had one extra vote, and it'd be a 3-vote majority, not a 2-vote majority, and we wouldn't have lost. Instead of, maybe we could have came to that compromise that candidate was hoping would go through, that so she would have a basis to say, hey, look, we can find bipartisan compromise with Democrats. Sending me to Congress is useful. But instead, that's not the path they went. They wanted to try an alternative path. An alternative path that Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, is leading them down. One of the things that he's getting critiqued about a lot right now is his holding up of a vote on the $95 billion. Now, there is certain $95 billion in assistance to foreign countries that include Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine, as well as replenishing American stocks. A lot of the stuff that says, oh, it's Ukraine aid, is actually just $20 billion of it is just replenishing American stocks. And a lot of it is buying from American defense companies. I think 90% of the money is going to end up being spent in the United States, even if the equipment is ended up being sent to Ukraine. He is getting critiqued from multiple angles. On one side, there are the isolationist MAGA Republicans who don't want to send over anything to Ukraine, who want to stop any deal on Ukraine. Marjorie Taylor Greene hinting that if there was to be sent a cent over to the Ukrainians, then she would do a recall vote. And then not only would that be disastrous for Mike Johnson's political career, but it would also probably be disastrous for the Republicans who are trying to send home the message as Americans are questioning if they have the ability to govern come around election day, if they're actually going to be able to even survive to the end of this Congress. So obviously he doesn't want to do that. But on the other end, there is still like a good 80, if you believe Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic House minority leader, then there is still about 80 Republicans who are still pretty much in the Ukraine camp and who would vote with Democrats, bare minimum, if you believe Jeffries, that want to side with them on sending this aid bill through. And if you look at the Senate, I mean, Mitch McConnell got it through. It was 70 votes in favor. That's like 10 votes more than necessary. So it went past the veto with ease. Only 20 votes, I think, ended up 20 or 26. I forget. I think 29 votes ended up being against it. But of the 29, there were like 4 or 5 that if it was a decisive vote and they were being honest about how they feel, it would probably be 3 or 4 more, but they voted against it because they could afford to vote against it with the bill still going through. So really, it was like a 3/4 majority if you would have pushed everybody. But even if the majority of the House and the majority of the Senate are in favor of it, Mike Johnson is the person who decides it comes to the House floor. And so, in order to appease those MAGA Republicans who don't want to send any money to Ukraine, and in order to please Trump, who is now not only lobbied against the immigration deal because he knew that the Democrats and even the House Republicans getting a win on immigration could undercut one of his biggest campaign messages, he's also trying to stop this aid from getting through, talking to Lindsey Graham and others that instead of sending any aid to Ukraine, it should be a big loan. So we would do loans to Ukraine. So, you know, those security agreements that we made in the 90s, all that's kind of worthless. You know, those other agreements or those statements we said we'd be with them until victory here, or we'd be with them as long as it takes, or no, actually scrape all that. American credibility, who needs it? Deterrence, who wants it? What matters at the end of the day isn't our commitments to these countries. What matters at the end of the day is making sure we turn a nice shiny penny at the end of it. I like that all the people who were telling me over the last year or two that, oh, the Ukrainians need to, throw in the towel, they need to do this, need to do that, they need to end the fight, and we shouldn't send any weapons over to them because it's wasting their lives. A lot of them are going to step in line once Trump gets in there. It's like, okay, we'll give stuff to the Ukrainians, but only if they take it as a loan so we make some money off of it. A lot of them are going to shut up. And a lot of them are going to shut up because it wasn't ever really about the Ukrainians. It was just about, being anti-establishment. And so now if Trump can give them another position that's anti-establishment that isn't completely throwing the Ukrainians out to the feeders, but is still, taking advantage of their vulnerabilities at the moment, they might jump on that. Anyway, this is the weird position that Mike Johnson is in. Obviously, the loans plan is not going to be passed. It's pretty ridiculous, but he needs to do something, yet he doesn't know what he's going to do. I think he genuinely doesn't have any personal political motivations to push it through outside of trying to make those moderate House Republicans happy so they don't go around him with a petition with Democrats to bring it to the House floor and go, that would mean circumventing his authority, which is possible if they can get 218 signatures, meaning they need about 4 or 5 Republicans to not switch parties or anything, but just sign this petition saying, yes, we want to go around the House Speaker to have a vote on this. So I do think he has some motivation, but he has said pretty openly he's not in a rush to pass aid to Ukraine, even as Avdiivka is getting hammered right now. A reporter started to pressure him on this, and he didn't do too well under the pressure.
One more.
Welcome back to you have said that you want to...
I'm sorry, this is not that loud. Let me turn this up.
One more.
Welcome back to you have said that you want a meeting with the president, as Scott was saying. H.R. 2 is dead in the Senate. You yourself were part of killing the Senate compromise bill.
Can I also throw this out there? H.R. 2 is not a bill to pass the Senate or House. HR 2 is a messaging bill. HR 2 was a bill that I think a lot of Republicans that actually signed on to it wouldn't even pass due to the nationwide e-verify requirements that are in it. That would anger a lot of the agricultural companies that lobby with the Republican Party. It's kind of like a starting point. It's like a flagpole that they've put in the ground to say, look how tough we are on immigration. So saying pass HR 2, when again, it's a messaging bill, it's not a bill that was made to pass, and the bill that was negotiated and made to pass over 5 months with one of the toughest border hawks in the Senate, Senator Langford from Oklahoma, that was sunk even before it touched the floor. And it was sunk purposely because Trump didn't want it. So then going back to, let's do HR 2 or let's pass the immigration deal. It sounds like this to me. We need immigration deal. Fine, here's immigration deal. No, not immigration deal. Okay, so here's the independent of immigration deal. We need an immigration deal. That's the situation we're in.
You called it dead on arrival from what you knew. So my question to you is, while you say there need to be solutions, what are House Republicans doing to get to a solution on the border and on Ukraine? Or are you going to actually do nothing? What is your proposal? What are you doing?
No, we're addressing each of those issues. They're important issues on the table. We are not going to be forced into action by the Senate, who in the latest...
Here's the thing, though. The conditions of the world should force you into action, not necessarily the Senate. What should be forcing you into action is looking over at the Ukrainians, seeing the critical shell shortage that is now leading. It's part of many contributing factors, but probably one of the primary ones leading to them to have to abandon Point Zenit, which they've held for 10 years. We're going to talk about that later in today's stream. 10 years. There was many factors that led to it, including a manpower shortage as the country debates mobilization, but the ammunition shortage. If you talk to any local source, they will say the ammunition shortage is one of the primary factors why the Russians have been able to take so much land in a short period of time relative to what they were taking before, how they're able to get through the urban environment and how they're trying to semi-encircle Avdiivka. If they had the ammunition to fight back, they'd be able to hold the Russians back. They'd be able to wreak upon them higher casualties, because if they don't establish that higher casualty ratio and they don't make the land that the Russians are taking for it more bloody, they might be able to continue to wear down their equipment. They might be able to continue to wear down their tanks, and the loss of Russian tanks and personnel around Avdiivka was devastating. But if they don't make it so that the ratio of Ukrainian loss to Russian loss is heavily disproportionate, then even if the Ukrainians are killing more Russian soldiers for Ukrainian soldiers, like if we go by the Jack Texera leaks, 2.5 to 1, they need to hit a ratio that is not refillable by the Russian armed forces. And right now, the Russian armed forces, along the contracts they're trying to put out, are getting like 80% of their quota, 80 to 85% of the quota around most regions. So they need more ammunition to increase the casualty numbers for the Russians, which holds them back, destroys more of their equipment, puts them in a better negotiating position, and, if possible in the future, allows them to therefore have more power not only in negotiations, but if negotiations don't happen, fail, or they're not able to attain what is necessary for us to be satisfied, then be able to push past it. But all of those plans for the future, none of that is possible unless they can stop the Russians and make them pay for every inch and make them stop moving forward. And they need ammunition to do that, which we've been holding up for about 120 days.
Product they sent us over does not have one word in the bill about America's border. Not one word about security.
No word about America's border. I mean, that other deal, which had already... it was going to pass the Senate if Donald Trump didn't step in the way of it. That had a lot of words about America's border. It was even too much of a compromise to most progressives. But given the circumstances and given how desperate the situation is and how you were leveraging America's national security for it, Democrats were willing to make the compromise for the betterment of the state. But no. Maybe you guys didn't actually believe Democrats would have called your bluff. Maybe you guys didn't know that Donald Trump was going to step up and say it was a campaign issue, but it was sunk. The immigration deal failed after 5 months of negotiation. And now what is he requesting? Another 5 months of negotiation? At a certain point, the question has to be asked, what is the interest of Mike Johnson here? It makes me start thinking, man, maybe all those stories about those Russian oligarchs that were trying to give Mike Johnson tens of thousands of dollars back in 2018 that was reported by Newsweek. It was $37,000, by the way. Maybe, and it, by the way, it was flagged and stopped and the people were fined involved. Maybe there is more to that. Maybe there is more to it. Because if Mike Johnson was willing to, make those type of compromises on the border, could he not go to Democrats and try to find some compromise to keep him in the House if he was to pass this through, working with moderate Republicans and try to find some Democrats that might be able to preserve him in the House, find some strategy of getting this through, because he needs to get it through, not only for his own political survival, but also he needs to get it through for the nation. And while he might think, oh, maybe if I just keep stopping this, I can politically survive. If you push those moderate House Republicans far enough, I don't know if we can get all 80 to 90 that Hakeem Jeffrey was talking about. But 4, I think that might be doable to get 4 to signed on to a petition to avoid him. And if he gets embarrassed like that, after the embarrassment of the first Mayorkas impeachment and the embarrassment of him trying to get Israel aid independently to try to satisfy some of those Republicans within this party and the base that he was required to satisfy in order to keep his, his political base satisfied, the evangelical base, he's in a difficult political position.
The reason that the other one was dead on arrival is because it did not meet the moment. It would not have solved the problem. You can't leave giant loopholes and codify some of the things that have gotten us into this situation. So what we're doing right now is the House is working its will. The House Republican Conference, we just met an hour ago with all the members, and there are lots of ideas on the table of how to address these issues. We will address the issues. We'll do.
They're still in the ideas phase. Okay, so it's 120 days in with no support. I've decided we're going to do a big old thought board. We're just going to put our thoughts on the chalkboard about what we should do as a country.
Do our duty on that matter, and all that begins in earnest right now.
Those 4 Republicans would get recalled, not happening. What do you mean they would get recalled? Do you mean like there would be like a recall vote? What, like? What do you mean they would get like recalled? Like there would be a special election? It's not as simple as we don't like how you voted, you're no longer in the seat. They would lose their seat. You mean that they would be challenged, they'd be primaried? I mean, maybe that's probably the biggest disincentive is there's going to be backlash for whoever breaks with the party on the issue.
We have to address this seriously. We have to actually solve the problems and not just...
they get primaried ASAP. They get primaried their next election.
Take political posturing as has happened in some of these other corners. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, Mike Johnson seems to be of the plan of continuing to do nothing. One of the arguments that he made as to why he can't do anything is he says, well, this isn't a priority. Ukraine aid, Israel, all these other things aren't a priority for me right now because I want to stop the budget, government from shutting down next month. See, it seems to me like at the moment they're delaying until they get to like a major point, and then they use the new major point as to why they can't make a deal. For example, 5 months of negotiation, they get a deal, bring it to the House floor. It's election season. We can't have a deal on the border around election season. Okay, well, then can we at least do it independently like we first said we were going to do, even if we just wasted all this time? Well, no. Well, all those other votes we did extending the negotiations and how we wouldn't attach Ukraine aid to any of those because we said that negotiating the budget was too important and we had to separate it. Well, yeah, let's do that again. And so let's not vote on that now. Let's figure out the budget in March, and then maybe after March, we can talk about Ukraine aid. That seems to be Mike Johnson's plan. So his plan is to wait through the entirety of February, negotiate a budget in March, figure out the budget, then negotiate Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan aid, add it with a new border deal, since he's saying it has nothing to do with the border. So I guess we are going to have to make a new border deal. Know how many months of negotiation that would take, since the last border deal took 5 months. So what would that be? Another 5 months? And what we would get, I think, Ukraine aid, say, April, May, June, July, August. Yeah, August or September. What would that be? August of September. And then, of course, it takes another month or two after it's approved to then be sent over. So maybe November or December. Look, obviously, I don't think it's going to be that long. I think the odds of it being that long are bad. But if you're treating this like how Mike Johnson is, and you're saying, oh, it's not that important, or, oh, you know, Ukraine aid can wait. I don't know how he says it can wait. A war isn't something that can wait. If Pearl Harbor happened, you know, I don't remember FDR saying, oh, this can wait a few weeks until we finish talks on, you know, this new Guatemalan immigration deal or this new trade deal with Madagascar. Nobody said after 9/11 or in the situation that was actively evolving very rapidly, like, oh, we can wait as long as we want. It's a war. Wars don't usually just wait around for you. It's something that is actively happening and you participate in. So no, I don't think you can wait. I don't think it's going to take that long. I hope it doesn't take that long. But if he doesn't bring it forward, I mean, I could see him trying to delay this another month, maybe 2 months. And again, what I've been warning about for a while is a situation where something really bad's going to have to happen in order for Republicans to do anything. Either like maybe if Avdiivka fell in dramatic fashion, let's say there was some big encirclement around Point Zenit. Now it sounds like they've been able to withdraw from Point Zenit, so that doesn't seem like it's going to be an issue. And even that might not be big enough. What would need to happen? I don't know what would need to happen. Would the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant need to fucking blow up? Would there need to be like a complete encirclement with Avdiivka and like 5,000 to 10,000 deaths? How many people have to die for Mike Johnson to be lulled into doing something? Representative Ted Lieu and other Democrats seem to be somewhat as frustrated. I don't think they're as frustrated as me, but they're a little frustrated by Mike Johnson's insistence that he can only do one thing at a time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaker Johnson said several times yesterday that one of the reasons he's not going to put the supplemental on the floor is he wants to focus on the appropriations deadlines that are coming up. As an appropriator, you understand how this process works. Is there anything about this process that would preclude him from putting this bill on the floor? What's your reaction to him saying that one of the reasons he's not in a hurry to put the supplemental on the floor is because he wants to focus on the upcoming appropriations deadline?
Look, Democrats also believe in on-the-job training, and that's clearly, you know, where Speaker Johnson is right now. But you have to be able to do two things at once. Nancy Pelosi frequently did 12 things. I understand doing two is hard for him. But that's what the job entails. And so we've got to focus. We have multiple priorities to get done, and that's what we should be focused on. But the Appropriations Committee should be working on. They have their numbers. They should be marking up those bills. We still have ample time on the floor this week and in 2 weeks that we can take up a national security supplemental.
Hey, maybe Mike. No. Mike Johnson has so many different, you know, bus stops to rename. Maybe even a mailbox or two. There's many important things that he has to do besides dealing with the largest war in Europe since World War II.
Speaker was truly intent on delivering this.
I mean, it's not like, you know, large-scale war in Europe has ever, involved the United States in it or dragged the United States into it once the stakes have gotten too big for us to ignore.
Or what we're finding out is he just wants to carry Donald Trump's water. But we have to be able to do multiple things at once here. But he's shown incapable of that.
Continuing, I'm not the only one frustrated. We've talked about former British Prime Minister Liz Truss complaining to America. We've talked about Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian politicians complaining to America. We've talked about the Polish Prime Minister complaining to the United States. Donald Tusk complaining and even saying that Ronald Reagan was turning in his grave. There were other American politicians who have been complaining. I know Bojo even released a statement talking about the holdup and even, I think, going after Tucker Carlson. It seems to be a real division divide between, it seems like almost the entire political spectrum in Europe, outside of the far right and the far left, like the Die Linke in Germany and the AfD in Germany, for example. They seem to all be together and saying, America, what are you doing? Article 5 has been called once. It was after 9/11. We paid our due. We came to you as you gallivanted throughout the Middle East and died with you. Ukraine lost 18 soldiers in Iraq and a war it had no business in. For you, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? We're increasing defense spending. We just approved this $50 billion deal for Ukraine. We're negotiating another $20 billion deal and weapons for Ukraine. That's on top of bilateral deals with Ukraine from the Norwegians, from the Finns, from the Germans, from the Italians. The Italians just renewed aid to the Ukraine, even though they should renew more. What are you doing? And David Cameron, another former British prime minister, has come forward perplexed at the lack of support from America on an issue that he can see as clearly in their interest. Now, he said something here that got under the skin of a certain American politician, somebody that Mike Johnson said would serve as House Speaker in his stay. Here's some statements from David Cameron. I am going to drop all diplomatic niceties. Now, by the way, he's the former British Prime Minister, but David Cameron is also now working in Rishi Sunak's administration. I forget his exact position. Can we actually check it out here? Let's look up David Cameron, and maybe it'll say his exact job right now. He's the Secretary of State for Foreign. He's like the Foreign Secretary of State. Okay, so yeah, so it deals with this issue. I'm going to drop all diplomatic niceties. I urge Congress to pass it. I do not want us to show the weakness displayed against Hitler in the 1930s. Wow, that's a hell of a statement. He's basically saying, hey, we're the British. Everybody knows who Neville Chamberlain is. Don't pull a Neville Chamberlain. That seems to be the message from David Cameron. I can read a few lines from here. I welcome the U.S. Senate passing the National Security Supplemental Bill on Monday. The funding package before Congress, including support to Ukraine, matters greatly to the UK and European security. I want to explain why. I believe in our special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, our partnership in defense and freedom. This is personal for me. My grandfather stormed the beaches of Normandy, and you get the idea. He goes into his history, and he makes an argument for it. If you want to read the article yourself, you can. But the point is, he argues why it's important for European interests, important for American interests. He talks about how appeasing Putin is not the way to go, and that Europe has approved $50 billion in multi-year funding. Europe is now contributing more to Ukraine than the United States. Now, this is a choice we face. Are we going to stand up to Putin? Or are we not going to stand up to Putin? Don't appease, right? Now, that line I said earlier, that line where he said, we don't want to repeat the same mistakes of the 1930s when it came to appeasement of Hitler. So Marjorie Taylor Greene heard a version of that quote, I guess. Apparently not the real version of the quote, because somehow she interpreted that to be that he called her Hitler. Listen to this. This is a European press outlet interviewing her, Sky News.
Secretary David Cameron says that you should vote through funding for Ukraine. What do you say to that?
I think he tried to compare us to Hitler also. And if that's the kind of language he wants to use, I really have nothing to say to him.
God, she's so historically illiterate. Oh my God, she's so historically illiterate. Dude, her IQ is beneath, it's not beneath the dirt. It's like in Mariana's Trench in the bottom of the ocean. She has sub-temperature IQs, man. Sub-temperature IQs. What is this? Crispy, thank you so much for the Prime. Oh my God. Look, okay. I can't believe I gotta do this. I'm gonna do another recommended reading for basic diplomatic history. The 20 Years Crisis. The 20 Years Crisis by E.H. Carr. It's not a long book. It's like what? How many pages? 170, 180 pages, something. Oh no, actually, I think it's it goes a little bit past 200 pages. It's a good book. I know a lot of realists love the book. A lot of realists talk about it all the time. There's a book you could read. There's tons of other books you could read. It has to do with the issue of appeasement an appeasement, okay? This doesn't have anything to do with her being a Nazi. This has to do with appeasement and how appeasement could just encourage the Russians to do more. If the United States, and look, I understand that ever backing down doesn't necessarily mean that all of your defenses collapse and everything's going to go. If you make everything a zero-sum game, then it could lead to you taking unnecessary risks, and it means that your risk manipulation could be pretty off-kilter and then lead to some pretty terrible disasters. But if the United States comes forward, and putting aside all of what I think is our clear geopolitical interest in European stability, as them still being our main export market, our number one export market, 45% of world GDP, the United States and Northern America. I could talk about, you know, the other agreements we made and American credibility. But on a basic level, if we tell the Ukrainians, hey, if you give up your nukes, we're going to defend you in the 90s. And then we say, after the Russians do the big invasion, after we, you know, kind of pussyfooted around the issue for 8 years, we say, hey, don't worry, homie, pat him on the back. We got your back. We're with you as long as it takes. And then the Russians proceed to faceplant, lose 300 to 400,000 soldiers injured and dead, lose like 40 to 50% of their artillery gun fleet, tons of gun barrels, tons of tanks, tons of armored vehicles, spend an exorbitant amount of shells, more than double their military budget, have military spending exceed social spending, have sanctions riddle their economy, and face every setback of the book. And somehow, after the Ukrainians have taken back over 50% of the territory that the Russians have taken in the big invasion since 2022, we're in a position less than 2 years into it where we're like, maybe we just drop our responsibility of it. Maybe we don't care about this part of Europe all that much. How will the Russians interpret that, especially combined with statements from Donald Trump that are like, oh, you know, maybe the Russians can do whatever the hell they want if you guys aren't going to pay up. It sounds like our interest in Europe is less like fundamental to our national security. And that is the argument we made that stopped the Soviets from starting a big war over Europe, from starting World War II, is that credibility to our deterrence. Instead of that being established, what is established instead is a transactional relationship where we treat ourselves like a mercenary company to all these states. And therefore, if the Russians can just offer us a few extra pennies, then maybe we'll let them have Estonia. Maybe Article 5 isn't that useful after all. Maybe it isn't ironclad as deterrent should be for it to be credible. Definitely when we're talking about deterrence in Europe, which is extremely important to us. Point is, I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene knows anything.
To use, I really have nothing to say to him.
Well, he likened you to an appeaser to Hitler in not voting through funding for Ukraine. Are you an appeaser for Putin?
You know, if you listen to historians, some historians will argue that Hitler was angry that the West caved to his demands over Czechoslovakia, that he kind of already wanted a war, and by the West caving to his demands so cuckedly, I don't know what other word to use, he got all he wanted, and then he was angry because he just wanted a reason to go to war, and so he had to push it down the line from 1938 to 1939.
I think that I really don't care what David Cameron has to say. I think that's rude name calling, and I don't appreciate that type of language. And David Cameron needs to worry about his own
appeasement. It's not about name calling. That's saying that your policy is leading to a position of appeasing the Russians, which is going to have a bad policy downstream effect. It is the most basic milquetoast base level critique, and it wasn't even of Marjorie Taylor Greene, it was of the United States, saying that if the United States engages in an appeasement in the same way that was in the 1930s, we already know what it leads to. It had nothing to do with her individually. I don't even think it individually had to do with the Republican Party specifically. It had to do with the country, and she's taken it so personally because she holds that position close to her heart. The abandon Ukrainians, the appease the Russians, because she is an appeaser. She does want to appease the Russians. She's the one saying that the Ukrainians are harvesting the organs of babies to pay for the war effort.
Calling, and I don't appreciate that type of language. And David Cameron needs to worry about his own country, and frankly, he can kiss my ass.
But do you think Putin's the good guy in all this?
Note, she was House Speaker during this interaction. Temporary House Speaker appointed by Mike Johnson. Wow, representing the country well. But she isn't the only one. Senator Tommy Tuberville, thankfully the bill has already gone through the Senate, so I don't think it's going to be much of an issue, at least at the moment. Senator Tommy Tuberville, after watching that Putin interview, he's been swooning over Putin for the last few days. I don't know why. He did TV interviews talking about how Putin really wants peace and it's the Western warmongers continuing this going. Well, now he did a radio interview of the same theme, saying that we kept forcing NATO on Russia, and this is all our fault because Putin's tired with us. Let's see what he had to say.
But we forced this issue. We kept forcing NATO all the way to Eastern Europe, and Putin just got tired of it. He said, listen, I do not want missiles on my border from the United States of America. It'd be like Russia coming to Mexico and putting missiles in Mexico. I understand what he's talking about.
Well, here's the first thing I want to say. So we forced the issue. We kept forcing NATO all the way to Eastern Europe. Let's be clear. Some senators were for it. Some senators were against it when we were expanding NATO. But we didn't force it. People say forcing NATO, like we came with an army and guns and bombs, and we marched across the former Warsaw countries, filling in the power vacuum with NATO American might. These countries asked to be part of NATO. Poland did. The Czechs did. The Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians did. All of them did, including the Ukrainians. So when we say forced, that makes it sound like we moved in aggressively with tanks and bombs to conquer all these countries. When these countries welcomed us in, that was the first thing. Secondly, Putin wanted to be part of NATO for a very long period of time. In 2002, not only the Russians were entertaining the idea of being part of NATO, but in 2002, Putin specifically said that Ukraine being part of NATO is a decision that's up to them. And lastly, NATO membership was not, I think, the primary motivating factor behind the Russians invading in 2022. The Ukrainians were no closer to joining NATO in 2022 than they were in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, every year. I mean, they weren't any closer. One of the main issues were going to be the fact that NATO has a part in its charter that was established in part partially because of this war, that if a country has a border dispute with another and it's engaged in that type of an active conflict, then they're not allowed to join NATO because NATO could then be dragged into that war. And that rule was put in place specifically to stop Ukraine from joining NATO. And then countries like Hungary, Turkey, France, Germany, those are just a few I can think of off the top of my head. There's other as well that were going to object to any Ukrainian membership of NATO. The Hungarians would especially hold out. Hell, the Hungarians are holding out right now. And so the idea that the Russians had to imminently move into Ukraine because we were going to establish NATO missiles in there, that's nonsense. And even if they did join NATO, even if the Ukrainians do join NATO, which I think it is their right to do, even if they did join, that doesn't necessarily mean we put missiles in there. We don't got missiles in Estonia. We don't got missiles in Latvia, Lithuania. We don't got missiles in these countries, but those are the countries in NATO that are the closest to Moscow. And all three of those countries are already on Russia's border. So we could have Ukraine in NATO just to establish deterrence, have a small force of 500 to 1,000 American soldiers in Kiev to dissuade a Russian invasion, just like we have in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. The force is not there as an invasion force. The force is not there in order to actually stop a Russian invasion if it was to occur. It is supposed to be an example of the American government burning the bridge behind them by having American troops there so that if the Russians invade, they know they're going to have to kill Yankees. And if they have to kill Yankees, then America's in the war whether they like it or not. It's not a question of America deliberating back at home in Washington, oh, do we send troops, do we not send troops? Because we already got Georgians and Virginians, Marylanders, Californians, Oklahomans, Washingtonians, and all these different people already over there in Estonia if that worst was to come. We could have that same situation with Ukraine. We could defend Ukraine with 1,000 soldiers just due to the concept of deterrence. It's an amazing thing. and we could avoid the missiles. We could avoid any Davy Crockett's too, any tactical nuclear warheads, which of course the Russians have at the ready. So I don't know. I think he's reading a little bit too much in that Putin interview. And the thing is about that Putin interview, Putin spent 44 minutes talking about the eternal Russia and how they have all these deep ties to Ukraine, all the way back to Kiev and Rus, trying to pretend Russia's like 1,000 fucking years old, trying to tie it back to Kiev and Rus is basically the Russian Federation. That was an argument for Russian imperialism, how Russia gets to own Ukraine, a lot less than NATO. And he spent a lot of time with the blank canvas he was given, 44 minutes, to establish that. And then he went on to talking about Nazis. He spent a very small portion of the interview, relatively speaking, talking about NATO. And the few times Tucker tried to bring it up, half of the time, he would just drop it immediately and move on to something else. Man, I don't know if we even watched the same interview, me and Tommy.
What he's talking about, you can tell Putin's on top of his game. One thing he said that it really rung a bell is the propaganda media machine over here. They sell anything they possibly can to go after Russia.
Wait. Let me hear this again. One thing he said that it really rung a bell is the propaganda media machine over here is they sell anything they can to possibly go after Russia. The largest mass grave in Europe since World War II, since the Yugoslav genocides, was discovered in Izium, over 440 bodies. The Russians do not need help in making themselves look bad. You just turn on Russian state TV that's meant for their domestic audience, not meant for the international audience, and you can find them talking about any number of days, nuking the United Kingdom, nuking Estonia, nuking Poland, nuking France, nuking this country.
Russia. They can't win. It's not going to happen. Somebody needs to negotiate. Donald Trump will have it over with in a matter of weeks.
Man, this is the type of stuff that if they do end up winning, that's going to, like, Tommy's legacy will be that moron who said the Ukrainians can't do it. That I'm just throwing that out there. That when you make these big predictions, like, these things are going to follow you forever. Like, I think part of the reason why Hassan was a little frustrated by that interview I did with those Ukrainians who were critiquing him about his early predictions is maybe he didn't realize that shit's going to follow him for the rest of his life because he was really, really stupid. And people need to know that next time he's talking about foreign policy conflict is that he said, oh, this was impossible to happen. And then it happened. If you make those types of mistakes, there's a propensity to make those types of mistakes again. J-Dams. Anyway, the Republican Civil War is intensifying. As the Mike Johnson administration, the Mike Johnson leadership in the House is starting to lose its grip as more and more dissent bubbles up to the surface. One example of this is I want to show you Representative Matt Gaetz and Mullen, Representative Mullen, two Republicans who have been going at it. Representative Mullen being more supportive of Ukraine, Matt Gaetz being completely against sending any aid to Ukraine. Well, Matt Gaetz, Mullen, I think at one point was talking about how Matt Gaetz used to pop pills and chase it down with energy drink, and he would used to brag about it to other legislators and talk about his sexual escapades. And so these are two people who already are not big fans of each other. Well, Representative Matt Gaetz is going after Mullen for allegedly, according to him trying to encourage Republicans to sign a discharge petition with Democrats to force the Senate's Ukraine, he calls it the Ukraine First bill. The Ukraine First bill. That's a really interesting way to pitch it. It's strange because 90% of the money is spent here and $20 billion of the money that's supposedly for Ukraine is being spent to refill American stockpiles. And a lot of these investments are putting aside. Ukraine First bill forward. He didn't have the guts to vote for it in the Senate, but wants the House to pass it. I will stand with Speaker Johnson to stop this terrible, unpaid for $95 billion aid bill. And Mullen responded by saying, Matt Gaetz is a liar. Those of us who have worked with him already know that. He should focus on his own ethics issues instead of spreading false Hill rumors. Now, what does this mean? What does he mean, his other ethics issues? Well, let me play some audio that recently leaked of a reporter talking to Kevin McCarthy about Matt Gaetz's relationship with Donald Trump.
I hope Nancy gets the help she needs. I really do.
Are you going to give her any help?
No, not help financially. I just hope she gets the help to straighten out her life. I mean, she's got a lot of challenges. No one will stay working for her.
Has there ever been any? Oh, that's about Nancy Mace. Yeah, apparently her staff hates her because she's very verbally abusive.
Conversations between you and the former president about Matt Gaetz and his decision to throw you out? Was he supportive of that?
I don't know how close you probably think the president is to Gaetz, but you should figure that out.
They're not actually that close? Gaetz makes it out to be like they're...
I'm sure. Gaetz probably makes a lot out of it. He probably lies about who he sleeps with, too.
Oh, snap! So for those of you who don't know, Matt Gaetz have had a few sex scandals earlier in this administration, with one of them being that he was accused of participating in sex trafficking, that one of his local Florida buddies that worked on the county level engaged in a bunch of crimes, including identity fraud, theft, running like cryptocurrency out of public buildings, really weird stuff. But one of them was that he was paying through Cash App, and we've got the record transactions, so we know that the money traded hands. So Matt Gaetz could sleep with this woman. I don't know if I say woman. I don't know if the word I use is a girl. I don't want to use the word woman because she was underage. She was 17 while Gaetz was working in Floridian politics. And this was a big scandal, and it got a lot of attention. Matt Gaetz said that this was the like different agencies going after him, people going after him. It ultimately didn't end up sinking him, and there didn't seem to be enough evidence that bubbled up to the surface to bring Gaetz down. And so it kind of died there. But that's the only thing I could think that Gaetz is referring to here. My goodness. How scandalous. The Civil War continues. I guess now we have to talk about the Ukrainians at Point Zenit and the withdrawal from there and stuff like that. He lied about dating Cassidy Hutchinson? Did he? What? Matt Gaetz, Cassidy Hutchinson. Ex-Trump aide Cassidy Hutchinson accusing Matt Gaetz of suggestive behavior in new book. What? Trump-era White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson accused Representative Matt Gaetz of making suggestive comments to her in the presence of top House Republicans. One of several allegations Hutchinson made of inappropriate behavior from men in Trump's orbit in her new book over a year after she earned national fame during the House January 6 hearings. Hutchinson claims that Gaetz once grazed her chin with his thumb and asked, "Has everyone ever told you you're a national treasure?" Oh! Oh, I felt like my chest was going to collapse in on itself. Oh my God. Wow. Could you imagine that image? Could you imagine Matt Gaetz taking a thumb to your chin and going like, "You're a national treasure"? Oh my God. Oh my God. Ugh. Okay. In another instance, they said that Gaetz appeared at her cabin door one night at Camp David, the presidential retreat, repeatedly asked her to escort him back to her cabin, even though it's impossible to get lost because all of the cabins are clearly marked in a circle drive. Representative Kevin McCarthy, who was allegedly present for the encounter, told Gaetz to get a life, according to the excerpt Maddow read on her show. Gaetz said he didn't remember the incident and claimed he dated Hutchinson years ago for a few weeks, but parted amicably and remained friends. He said in a statement accusing Hutchinson of dishonestly turning against so many people who cared about her fame and book sales. Hutchinson admitted she was friends with Gaetz, but told Maddow she would never date him. "I have much higher standards in men, and Matt, frankly, is a very unserious person." Oh my God. Oh, that's so brutal. Oh, that's so bad.